Settle in for a story where one slap changes two lives forever. Blue Crossing sat low and stubborn against the Wyoming wind, a town that had learned to survive on freight, cattle, and the iron will of the people who refused to leave. Cora Everly stood outside the newspaper office she had inherited 6 months ago, ink still staining her fingers from the morning edition, and watched Wyatt Cutter unload crates from his freight wagon with the kind of efficiency that made dangerous men look calm. She had written 3 editorials questioning the missing shipments on his routes. He had not answered a single one. The town had started to whisper. Cora had started to wonder if she had made an enemy she could not afford. The freight office door slammed open. A man stumbled out, hatless, wild-eyed, pointing back toward Wyatt. "It is him," the man shouted. "He has been taking the loads. I seen the invoices." Cora's heart kicked hard. She had suspected. She had written carefully worded questions. But she had never expected a witness to step forward in broad daylight on the coldest day of February. Wyatt turned slowly, his hand still on a crate, his face unreadable. The street went quiet. Cora felt every eye in town shift between the freight foreman and the newspaper editor, who had dared to ask questions. The accuser was a clerk named Havers, thin and shaking, his coat too big for his frame. He worked for the land office, not the freight company. Cora did not know why he would have seen invoices. She stepped off the sidewalk, her breath misting in the cold air, her notebook already in her hand. "Mr. Havers," she called. "What invoices?" Havers jerked toward her, his eyes too bright, the ones showing double payments. "Wyatt Cutter has been billing for full loads and delivering half, keeping the difference. I got proof." Cora's pulse hammered. If this was true, Wyatt had stolen thousands of dollars. If this was true, her editorials had been right. If this was true, the man she had been watching for 6 months, the man whose quiet competence had made her wonder what kind of person lived behind that steady gray gaze, was a thief. Wyatt set the crate down with deliberate care. He stepped into the street, his coat open despite the wind, his expression carved from stone. "Mr. Havers," he said, his voice low and even. "You are going to need to show that proof." Havers backpedaled, his hand fumbling inside his coat. "I got it right here," he said. "I got the ledger." He pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, waving them like a flag. Cora moved closer, her boots crunching on frozen mud. The crowd pressed in from both sides of the street, drawn by the promise of scandal. Wyatt did not move. He stood in the center of the street, his hands loose at his sides, and Cora realized with a cold shock that he looked like a man waiting for a verdict he had already accepted. "Let me see those papers," Cora said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Havers turned to her, relief flooding his face. "Miss Everly, you have been writing about this. You know something is wrong." He thrust the papers toward her. Cora took them, her fingers numb inside her gloves. The ledger pages were smudged, the ink uneven, the columns listing freight weights and payments. She scanned the numbers, her mind racing. The discrepancies were there, stark and damning. Wyatt Cutter's name appeared on every questioned route. She looked up, meeting Wyatt's eyes across the narrow space. He did not flinch. He did not offer an explanation. He just watched her, and she saw something in his face that made her chest tighten. A resignation so deep it looked like grief. "You are the editor," someone called from the crowd. What does it say? Cora, his throat went dry. She had built her reputation on asking hard questions. She had written editorials demanding accountability. If she said the ledger proved Wyatt as guilt, the town would believe her. If she said nothing, they would think she was protecting him. She looked down at the papers again, forcing herself to read more carefully. The handwriting was too neat. The ink was too fresh. The pages were not bound into a ledger, they were loose sheets, and the edges were too clean, as if they had been prepared recently. Her stomach dropped. "This is not proof," she said. "This is a copy." Haver's face twisted. "It is proof enough," he snapped. "Everyone knows Cutter comes from outlaw blood. His brother rode with the Red Canyon gang. You think he is any different?" The words hit Wyatt like a physical blow. Cora saw it in the way his shoulders went rigid, the way his jaw clenched. She had heard the rumors about his family. Everyone in Blue Crossing had. Wyatt, his younger brother, had been killed 2 years ago in a shootout with a marshal, and the town had never let Wyatt forget it. But she had also seen Wyatt work. She had watched him handle disputes with fairness, pay his crews on time, and take responsibility for every damaged crate and delayed shipment. She had written her editorials because the numbers did not add up, not because she believed he was a thief. And now, standing in the cold street with a doctored ledger in her hands and a frightened clerk pointing fingers, she realized she had a choice. She could let the town convict Wyatt on suspicion and family history. Or she could demand real proof. "Mr. Havers," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur. "Where did you get this ledger?" Havers blinked. "From the freight office." "When?" "This morning." Cora's mind raced. The freight office had been locked this morning. She had walked past it on her way to the newspaper. "Who gave you the key?" Havers hesitated, his confidence faltering. I found it open." Cora stepped closer, her notebook open, her pencil poised. "You found the office open. You walked in, and you found a ledger showing theft. All on the same morning you decided to accuse the foreman in the middle of the street." Havers' face flushed. "I am trying to help this town." Cora met his eyes. "Or you are trying to get rid of someone." Havers' mouth opened, then closed. The crowd shifted, uncertainty rippling through the circle of onlookers. Wyatt moved then, stepping forward until he was close enough that Cora could see the faint scar along his jaw, the exhaustion in his eyes. "Miss Everly," he said quietly, "you do not have to do this." Cora looked up at him, her heart hammering. "Do what?" "Defend me." She felt the weight of the town as attention, the ledger pages cold in her hand. "I am not defending you," she said. "I am asking for proof. There is a difference." Wyatt's expression shifted, something unreadable passing through his eyes. She thought it might be gratitude, or maybe just surprise that anyone in Blue Crossing would ask questions instead of accepting the easy answer. Before she could say more, a shout came from the end of the street. "Fire! The freight warehouse is on fire." The crowd broke apart like water hitting stone. People ran toward the warehouse, shouting for buckets, for the fire wagon, for anyone with sense to help. Cora stood frozen for a heartbeat, the ledger pages fluttering in her hand. The warehouse held every shipment waiting for spring distribution. If it burned, Blue Crossing would lose months of supplies. Wyatt was already running. his long strides eating the distance, his coat flying behind him. Cora shoved the papers into her coat pocket and ran after him, her skirts heavy with cold, her breath tearing in her lungs. She did not know why she followed. She only knew that she could not let him face this alone. Not when someone had just tried to destroy him with lies, and the town was ready to believe the worst. The warehouse was already half consumed when they reached it, flames chewing through the wooden walls, smoke pouring into the pale sky. Men were hauling buckets from the water trough, throwing pathetic splashes against an inferno that laughed at their efforts. Wyatt did not stop at the bucket line. He ran straight for the side door, the one that led to the office where the freight logs were kept. Cora's heart seized. He was going inside. She lunged after him, grabbing his arm. "You cannot," she shouted over the roar. "It is too late." Wyatt turned, his face grim. "The logs are in there. If they burn, I have no proof I did not steal anything. Havers wins." Cora stared at him. He was willing to die for his reputation, for the truth. She tightened her grip. "Then I am coming with you." Wyatt, his eyes widened. "No, you are not." Cora pulled her scarf up over her nose and mouth. "I am the one who wrote the editorial," she said. "If the logs matter, I need to see them." Wyatt looked at her for one long second. And she saw the war in his face, the need to protect her battling the desperate knowledge that she was right. Finally he nodded, a sharp jerk of his head. "Stay close. Do exactly what I say." They ran for the door together, the heat hitting them like a wall, smoke thick enough to choke on. Wyatt kicked the door open and plunged inside. Cora followed, her eyes streaming, her lungs burning. The office was a small room off the main storage floor, the walls already glowing with heat. Wyatt grabbed a leather satchel from the desk, shoving ledger books inside with frantic speed. Cora saw the columns of numbers, the careful handwriting, the weight and payment records that would prove whether Wyatt had stolen or been framed. She grabbed a second book, her fingers clumsy, and shoved it into the satchel. The ceiling groaned. "Go!" Wyatt shouted, and they ran. They burst out of the side door seconds before the roof collapsed, the satchel clutched between them, their coats smoking. Cora stumbled, her lungs screaming, and Wyatt caught her, his arm hard around her waist, dragging her away from the heat. They collapsed together against the side of the feed store, coughing, gasping, alive. Cora looked up at him through streaming eyes and saw the soot on his face, the burn on his hand where he had grabbed the door latch, the fierce determination that had driven him into the fire. And she thought, with a clarity that cut through the smoke and fear, that she had been wrong about Wyatt Cutter. Not wrong to ask questions, but wrong to think he was anything like the easy villain the town wanted him to be. The town saved what it could. By nightfall, the warehouse was a blackened skeleton, and the freight company had lost a third of its winter inventory. Wyatt sat on the steps of the freight office, the satchel beside him, his burned hand wrapped in a strip of cloth Cora had torn from her petticoat. She sat beside him, her coat ruined, her hair a disaster, her throat raw. They had not spoken since stumbling out of the fire. Around them, men were checking the remaining buildings, making sure no embers had spread. The sheriff, a gray-haired man named Torrance, walked over, his expression weary. "Cutter," he said. "We need to talk about those accusations." Wyatt looked up. "Havers set the fire," he said flatly. to destroy the logs before anyone could check them. Torrance frowned. That is a serious charge. You got proof? Wyatt tapped the satchel. I got the real logs. Every shipment I handled is accounted for. Weights, payments, signatures. If Havers had proof I stole anything, he would not have needed to forge a ledger. And he sure as hell would not have burned down the warehouse to hide the truth. Torrance looked at Cora. Miss Everly, you were there. What do you say? Cora met his eyes, her voice hoarse. I say the papers Mr. Havers showed me were copies, not originals. I say he claimed to find the office unlocked the same morning he made his accusation. And I say we need to ask him why he wanted Wyatt Cutter discredited badly enough to risk arson. Torrance sighed. I will bring him in. He walked away, his boots heavy on the frozen ground. Cora turned to Wyatt. Why did you go into the fire? Wyatt looked at her, his gray eyes shadowed. Because my brother was guilty, he said quietly. And I am not. The words settled between them like stones. Cora had a dozen questions, but she did not ask them. Instead, she said, I am sorry I wrote those editorials. Wyatt shook his head. You were right to ask. The numbers did not add up. That is what a good editor does. Cora felt something loosen in her chest. Then help me understand. Show me the logs. Prove you are innocent. Wyatt opened the satchel, pulling out the ledger books, and they bent over the pages together in the fading light. Cora saw the careful records, the weights that matched the invoices, the payments that balanced to the penny. She also saw the pattern, the way certain shipments had been short but marked as full, the discrepancies blamed on rough roads or spoilage. Someone had been skimming the freight company for months, but it was not Wyatt. The handwriting in the false entries was different. Lighter, more cramped. She looked up. Who else keeps records? Wyatt, his jaw tightened. The land office clerk. Havers. They worked through the night, cross-referencing the real logs against the freight company invoices, building a case that turned Havers from accuser to suspect. Cora wrote fast, her journalist instincts sharpening every line, her anger at being used driving her pen. Wyatt answered her questions with a precision that told her he had been carrying this weight for months, knowing something was wrong, but unable to prove it, without risking his job and his name. By dawn, they had a story. Havers had been altering land office records to hide illegal sales, then skimming freight payments to cover his tracks. When Wyatt had started asking questions, Havers had decided to frame him first. It was neat. It was ruthless. And it had almost worked. Cora finished writing, her hand cramped, her eyes gritty. She looked at Wyatt, who sat slumped against the desk, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Why did you not tell anyone, she asked, that you suspected Havers? Wyatt opened his eyes. Because my brother ran with outlaws, he said. Because half this town thinks I am one bad day away from following him. If I had accused Havers without proof, they would have said I was lying to cover my own crimes. Cora felt a sharp twist of anger, not at Wyatt, but at the town that had judged him guilty before he had done anything wrong. She folded her notes, her decision made. I am running this story in the morning edition, she said, with your name cleared and Havers named as the thief. Wyatt sat up slowly. That will make you a target. If Havers has partners, they will come after you. Cora met his eyes. Then I guess you better make sure I stay alive long enough to print it. The morning edition of the Blue Crossing Gazette hit the streets at 8, and by 9 the town was in an uproar. Cora stood in the newspaper office doorway, watching the crowd gather outside the sheriff's building, her stomach tight with nerves. She had named Havers. She had laid out the evidence. She had called for his arrest. Now she had to wait and see if the town would believe her, or decide she had been fooled by a charming outlaw as brother. Wyatt appeared at her elbow, his coat buttoned, his hat low, his expression unreadable. "You should not be standing here," he said. "If Havers has friends, they will see you as the threat." Cora did not move. "If I hide, they win," she said. "If I stand here, they know I am not backing down." Wyatt was silent for a moment. Then he stepped up beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Then I guess I am standing here too." The sheriff brought Havers out in handcuffs an hour later, and the crowd surged forward, shouting questions, demanding answers. Cora watched Havers' face, pale and furious, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked on her. "You ruined me," he screamed. "You and that outlaw trash." Cora felt Wyatt go rigid beside her. She stepped forward before he could move, her voice ringing clear. "You ruined yourself, Mr. Havers. I just reported the truth." Havers lunged against the sheriff's grip, spit flying. "You think Cutter is innocent? Ask him about his brother. Ask him who he visited in the Red Canyon hideout 3 months before the gang got caught." The crowd went silent. Cora, his heart sank. She turned to Wyatt, dread pooling cold in her stomach. Wyatt stood frozen, his face drained of color, and she knew, with a sick certainty, that Havers had just told the truth. The crowd turned on Wyatt like a pack. "Outlaw," someone shouted. He was part of it all along. Cora felt the shift, the way fear and anger could turn a town into a mob. She stepped between Wyatt and the nearest man, her hands up. "Stop. Listen. Wyatt went to see his brother because his brother asked him to. That does not make him a criminal." A woman in a faded shawl pushed forward. He knew where the gang was hiding. He could have told the marshal. Why did he not? Cora opened her mouth, but she had no answer. She looked at Wyatt, silently begging him to explain, to defend himself, to give her something to work with. Wyatt met her eyes, and she saw the truth there, stark and painful. "Because I wanted to save my brother," he said quietly. "Because I thought if I could talk to him, I could convince him to turn himself in. I failed. He died in that shootout because I was not fast enough or smart enough to change his mind. So yes, I knew where the hideout was. And no, I did not tell the marshal. I chose my brother over the law, and I have been paying for it ever since." The confession hung in the cold air, brutal and honest. Cora felt the crowd waver, some faces softening, others hardening further. She knew this was the moment that would define Wyatt in Blue Crossing forever. If she walked away now, the town would convict him. If she stood beside him, she would be tying her reputation to a man who had protected an outlaw, even if that outlaw was family. Her decision took less than a heartbeat. She turned to the crowd, her voice steady. Wyatt Cutter made a choice to try to save his brother. That makes him loyal, not criminal. He did not ride with the gang. He did not steal from this town. And he risked his life to save the freight logs that prove Havers is the thief, not him. If you want to condemn a man for loving his family, go ahead. But do not pretend it is justice. The silence that followed was fragile. Then a voice spoke from the back of the crowd. An older man Cora recognized as the dry goods merchant. "My son rode with bad men when he was young," the man said. "I did not turn him in either." "Does that make me an outlaw?" A few people shifted uncomfortably. Another voice. A woman this time. "Havers tried to frame an innocent man and burned down the warehouse. That is who should be in jail." The crowd began to fracture, argument replacing unified anger. Cora felt her knees go weak with relief. The sheriff stepped forward, his voice hard. "This is over. Havers is under arrest. Cutter is cleared of theft. If anyone has a problem with that, take it up with the judge when he comes through next month. Now go home." The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, but it dispersed. Cora turned to Wyatt, her heart hammering. He was staring at her as if she had just stepped out of a dream he did not dare believe in. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice rough. Cora met his eyes. "Because you told the truth," she said. "And because I would have done the same thing." Wyatt shook his head slowly. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Cora felt something shift in her chest, something fierce and undeniable. "Maybe not," she said. "But I know what it looks like when a man is willing to burn for the truth. And I know I am tired of watching good people get destroyed by lies." They stood in the middle of the street, the town moving around them, and Cora realized with a jolt that she had just tied her life to his in a way that could not be undone. The town would remember this. They would talk. And she did not care. Before she could say more, Wyatt stepped back, his expression shuddering. "I need to check the freight yard," he said. "Make sure the fire did not spread to the stables." He walked away, his shoulders stiff, and Cora watched him go, frustration and confusion tangling in her chest. The rest of the day passed in a blur of questions and rumors. Cora fielded interviews from townspeople who wanted to know more about Havers, about the theft, about Wyatt, his family. She wrote carefully, balancing truth with discretion, knowing that every word she printed would either build Wyatt up or tear him down. By evening, she was exhausted, her throat still raw from the smoke, her hands aching from the cold. She locked the newspaper office and walked toward the boarding house where she rented a room, her mind too full to rest. She did not see the man step out of the alley until he was blocking her path, his face shadowed by his hat, his voice low and threatening. "You should have kept your mouth shut," he said. "Now you are going to pay for it." Cora froze, her heart slamming into her ribs. The man was big, his coat stained, his breath reeking of whiskey. She tried to step around him, but he moved with her, his hand shooting out to grab her arm. "You cost Havers everything," he said. "Cost some other folks too. They are not happy." Cora yanked her arm back, fear giving her strength. "Let go of me." The man laughed, a harsh sound. "Or what? You will write another editorial." The alley was narrow, the street behind her empty in the twilight. Cora opened her mouth to scream, but the man his hand clamped over her face, dragging her backward into the shadows. Panic flooded her, sharp and cold. She clawed at his hand, kicked at his shins, fought with everything she had. Then a shadow moved behind the man, fast and silent, and Wyatt, his voice cut through the struggle like a blade. "Let her go." The man spun, his grip loosening just enough for Cora to wrench free. She stumbled forward, gasping, and saw Wyatt standing at the mouth of the alley, his coat open, his stance wide and balanced, his eyes cold as winter. The man snarled, "This is not your business, Cutter." Wyatt stepped into the alley, his movements deliberate. "She is my business," he said. "Walk away, or I put you down." The man hesitated, his hand dropping to his belt where a knife handle gleamed. "Cora," his breath caught. Wyatt did not move. He just stared at the man, and Cora saw something in his face that made her believe, absolutely, that he would do exactly what he promised. The man must have seen it too, because he spat on the ground and backed away, muttering curses. Wyatt did not relax until the man disappeared around the corner. Then he turned to Cora, his expression shifting from lethal to something raw. "Are you hurt?" Cora shook her head, her voice shaking. "How did you know?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "I have been watching the street since this afternoon. I figured Havers had partners. I figured they would come after you." Cora stared at him, her fear draining into something warmer, something that made her chest ache. "You have been following me." Wyatt looked away, his hands clenching into fists. "I should have stayed closer. I should have stopped him before he touched you." Cora stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her hand reaching up to touch his arm. "Wyatt," she said, "you saved me. Again." Wyatt looked down at her, his eyes dark with something she did not have a name for. "That is the problem," he said quietly. "I keep saving you, and you keep making it harder to walk away." The words hung between them, electric and dangerous. Cora felt her heartbeat in her throat, felt the warmth of Wyatt's arm under her hand, felt the pull of something that should have terrified her but only made her want to step closer. "Why would you walk away?" she asked. Wyatt, his expression twisted. "Because you deserve better than the brother of an outlaw. Because this town will never let me be anything else. Because every time you stand up for me, you lose a piece of your reputation." Cora tightened her grip on his arm. "I do not care about reputation," she said. "I care about the truth. And the truth is, you are the most honest man I have ever met." Wyatt shook his head, something like pain crossing his face. "You do not know what you are saying." Cora lifted her chin. "Yes, I do. I am saying I trust you. And I am asking you to trust me." For a long moment, Wyatt just looked at her. And Cora saw the war in his eyes, the need battling the fear. Then he reached up, his burned hand gentle despite the bandage, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You are going to regret this," he said quietly. Cora smiled, a small, fierce thing. "Maybe, but I would rather regret standing with you than regret walking away." Wyatt's breath hitched, and then he was pulling her close, his arms wrapping around her, his face buried in her hair. Cora held on, her hands fisting in his coat, and felt the shudder that ran through him. The relief and fear and desperate hope all tangled together. They stood in the cold alley, wrapped around each other, and Cora thought that this, right here, was the moment her life had been leading to. Not the editorials, not the confrontation with the crowd, but this quiet, fierce decision to choose a man the town had decided to throw away. They walked back to the boarding house together, Wyatt his hand at the small of her back, his eyes scanning the street for threats. Cora felt the weight of the town as attention, the curtains twitching, the whispers starting. By morning, everyone would know that Cora Everly and Wyatt Cutter had been seen together in the twilight, closer than propriety allowed. she did not care. She was done pretending that propriety mattered more than truth. At the boarding house door, Wyatt stopped, his hand still on her back. "I will be here at dawn," he said, "to walk you to the office." Cora looked up at him. "You do not have to protect me every minute." Wyatt's expression was grim. "Until I know Haver's partners are dealt with? Yes, I do." Cora felt a flicker of exasperation mixed with something warmer. "Fine," she said, "but I am bringing coffee." Wyatt's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Deal." Cora slept badly, her dreams full of smoke and threats and the feel of Wyatt's arms around her. She woke before dawn, dressed in her warmest clothes, and made coffee on the boarding house stove. When she stepped outside, Wyatt was already there, leaning against the hitching post, his breath misting in the pre-dawn cold. She handed him a tin cup and watched the surprise flicker across his face. "You brought coffee," he said. Cora shrugged. "I keep my promises." They walked to the newspaper office in comfortable silence, the town still sleeping around them. Cora unlocked the door and lit the lamps, the familiar smell of ink and paper settling her nerves. Wyatt stood by the window, his eyes on the street, his posture alert. Cora poured herself another cup of coffee and started sorting the stories for the next edition. She was halfway through an article on the warehouse fire when the door burst open and Sheriff Torrance strode in, his face hard as stone. "Miss Everly," the sheriff said, "I need to talk to you about last night." Cora set down her pencil. "What about it?" Torrance glanced at Wyatt, then back at her. "A man was found dead in an alley this morning. Knife wound. He matches the description of the man who attacked you." Cora, his blood went cold. "Dead?" Torrance nodded. "Someone killed him between midnight and dawn. And the only people who knew about the attack were you, Cutter, and the dead man." Cora felt the world tilt. She looked at Wyatt, whose face had gone still and watchful. The sheriff's meaning was clear. Wyatt was the suspect. Again, Cora stood, her hands flat on the desk. "Wyatt was with me until I went inside the boarding house. After that, I do not know where he went. But I do know he is not a murderer." Torrance sighed. "I am not saying he is. But I need to ask questions. Cutter, where were you between midnight and dawn?" Wyatt met the sheriff's eyes. "At the freight yard, checking the stables, making sure no one tried to finish what Haver started." Torrance frowned. "Anyone see you?" Wyatt hesitated. "No." Cora's heart sank. No alibi. No witnesses. Just Wyatt's word against a dead man. Torrance rubbed his face. "I do not want to arrest you, Cutter, but the town is already talking. If I do not bring you in, they will say I am playing favorites." Wyatt nodded slowly. "I understand." Cora lunged forward. "No. You cannot arrest him. He did not do this." Torrance looked at her, his expression weary. "Then help me prove it. Because right now, all I got is a dead man who threatened you, and a suspect who was seen with you right before he died." Cora's mind raced. There had to be something. Some piece of evidence, some witness, some way to prove Wyatt was innocent. She grabbed her coat. "I am going to that alley," she said, "and I am going to find out who really killed that man." The alley where the man had died was roped off, but Cora ducked under the rope with the kind of boldness that came from righteous fury. Wyatt followed, and the sheriff trailed behind them, muttering about procedure. The body was gone, but the bloodstain was still there, dark and frozen on the packed dirt. Cora crouched beside it, forcing herself to look, to think like a journalist instead of a woman who had been terrified just hours ago. The knife wound was in the man's back. A single deep thrust, angled upward. Whoever killed him had come from behind, fast and silent. That did not match Wyatt. If Wyatt had confronted the man, it would have been face to face, the way he faced everything. She stood, scanning the alley. The walls were close, the ground churned with boot prints, too many to separate one from another. But there, near the back wall, something gleamed in the cold light. She walked over and picked it up. A button, brass, stamped with a pattern she recognized. Land office uniform. She turned to the sheriff, holding up the button. Havers had partners, she said. Men who worked with him. Men who wore land office uniforms. Torrance took the button, his expression shifting. This does not prove Cutter is innocent. Cora felt frustration surge. It proves someone else was here. Someone connected to Havers. The sheriff pocketed the button. I will look into it. But until I know more, Cutter stays with me. Wyatt stepped forward. I will come willingly. I am not running. Cora grabbed his arm, her voice desperate. You cannot let them lock you up. They will convict you, just because it is easier than finding the real killer. Wyatt covered her hand with his. I will be fine. You just keep digging. Find the truth. That is what you do. He walked away with the sheriff, and Cora stood in the alley, her chest tight with fear and rage, and the helpless knowledge that she was losing him. She spent the rest of the day tearing through every record she could find, talking to everyone who had worked with Havers, following every thread that connected the land office to the freight thefts. By evening, she had a list of 3 men who had access to both offices, who had been seen with Havers in the weeks before the fire, who had the skills and the motive to kill a man who might talk. She took the list to the sheriff, her hands shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. Torrance read it, his face grim. This is good work, Miss Everly, but it is not proof. Cora wanted to scream. What do you need? A signed confession. Torrance met her eyes. I need one of these men to make a mistake, and I need you to stay out of it before you get hurt. Cora shook her head. I am not stopping. Not until Wyatt is free. Torrance sighed. Then at least be smart about it. Do not go anywhere alone. And do not trust anyone on this list. She went back to the newspaper office and wrote through the night, laying out the case against Havers' partners, naming names, daring them to respond. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was exactly what a good editor would do. She printed a special edition at dawn and distributed it herself, walking the cold streets with a stack of papers under her arm and a sense of grim satisfaction. The town read. The town reacted. By midday, 2 of the men on her list had fled Blue Crossing, and the third, a land office clerk named Marsh, was brought in for questioning. Cora stood outside the sheriff's office, her breath misting, her heart pounding. If Marsh confessed, Wyatt would be cleared. If he did not, she had just painted a target on her own back for nothing. The door opened. The sheriff stepped out, his expression unreadable. Marsh talked, he said. He admitted to the theft ring. And he admitted to killing the man in the alley. Said the man was going to turn on Haver's partners, so Marsh shut him up. Cora's knees went weak. Wyatt. Torrance nodded. I am releasing him now. Wyatt walked out of the jail, blinking in the cold sunlight, and Cora ran to him without thinking. She collided with his chest, her arms wrapping around him, her face pressed against his coat. He smelled like sweat and smoke and something indefinably him, and she did not care. Wyatt's arms came around her slowly, as if he could not quite believe she was real. You did it, he said, his voice rough. You cleared me. Cora pulled back just enough to look up at him. We did it. Together. Wyatt shook his head, a small, wondering smile tugging at his mouth. No. You did it. You are the most stubborn, fearless, reckless woman I have ever met. And you just saved my life. Cora felt heat rise in her cheeks. I was not going to let them take you. Wyatt's smile faded, his eyes going serious. Why? Why do you care this much? Cora took a breath, her heart hammering. Because I think I am falling in love with you. The words fell between them like stones into still water, ripples spreading outward. Wyatt went very still, his hands tightening on her arms. You do not mean that, he said. Cora lifted her chin. Yes, I do. I know it is fast. I know it is complicated. I know the town will talk. But I am done pretending I do not feel this. Wyatt stared at her, his expression raw. I am not a safe choice. I am not even a good choice. My family is a mess. My reputation is hanging by a thread. And I do not know if I can give you the life you deserve. Cora reached up, her hand cupping his jaw. I do not want safe. I want real. And you are the realest thing I have ever found. Wyatt made a low sound, something between a laugh and a groan, and then he was kissing her, his mouth fierce and desperate and achingly tender. Cora kissed him back, her hands fisting in his coat, the town and the scandal and everything else fading into nothing. When they finally pulled apart, breathing hard, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. I do not deserve you, he said. Cora smiled. Too bad. You are stuck with me. They stood there, wrapped around each other, and Cora felt the town watching, felt the weight of judgment and curiosity and scandal settling over them like a cloak. Then someone started clapping. Slow, deliberate, sarcastic. Cora turned, dread pooling in her stomach. A man stood at the edge of the crowd, tall and lean, his face shadowed by his hat, his smile cold. Well, he said, is not this sweet? The outlaw's brother and the nosy editor. You two make quite a pair. Wyatt went rigid, his hands falling away from Cora. The man stepped closer, and Cora saw the resemblance. The same gray eyes, the same lean build. But where Wyatt's face was hard-earned and honest, this man's face was sharp with cruelty. She knew, with a sinking certainty, who he was. The wounded rival. The man from Wyatt's past who should have been dead. Wyatt's voice was flat. Ben. The man, Ben, grinned. Surprised. I bet you are. Everyone thought I died in that canyon shootout. Turns out, I am harder to kill than the marshal expected. He looked at Cora, his eyes raking over her with deliberate insult. "This your woman, Wyatt. She know what you did, what you really did." Cora stepped forward, her voice ice. "I know he tried to save his brother. I know he failed. And I know he has been paying for it ever since. What I do not know is why a dead man is walking around my town making threats." Ben laughed. "Because I am not dead, and because I got a score to settle. Wyatt tried to turn me in, tried to convince me to surrender. Almost cost me everything. So now, I am here to return the favor." He pulled back his coat, revealing the gun at his hip. Wyatt moved, putting himself between Ben and Cora. "You want me? Fine. But you leave her out of this." Ben's smile widened. "Oh, she is already in it. See, I heard about your little romance. Heard about her editorials. Thought it would be fun to watch you lose something you care about, the way I lost my brother." Cora's heart stopped. "Wyatt is brother." Ben nodded, reading her face. "That is right. Wyatt did not tell you. My brother, the one who died in the canyon. He died because Wyatt set up the meeting with the marshal. He thought he could negotiate. He thought he could save us both. Instead, he got my brother killed. And now I am going to make sure he understands what that feels like." He drew his gun, fast and smooth, and aimed it at Cora. Wyatt lunged, but Ben shifted his aim to Wyatt's chest. "Do not move. Or I shoot her first." Cora felt the world narrow to the barrel of the gun, the cold certainty that Ben would pull the trigger, and Wyatt's face, raw with desperation and grief. The sheriff's voice cut through the tension. "Put the gun down, Ben. Now." Ben did not look away from Wyatt. "Cannot do that, Sheriff. I got a debt to settle." Torrance stepped into view, his own gun drawn. "And I got a duty to this town. You fire that weapon, you will not leave here alive." Ben laughed, a harsh sound. "Then I guess we all die together." The standoff stretched, seconds feeling like hours. Cora saw Wyatt's hands twitch, saw the calculation in his eyes, the desperate knowledge that he could not reach Ben before Ben fired. She saw the crowd, frozen and useless, and the sheriff, too far away to stop what was coming. And she made a choice. She stepped sideways, putting herself between Wyatt and the gun, her voice clear and steady. "If you want to hurt him, you will have to go through me." Ben's eyes widened. Wyatt grabbed her arm, his voice a harsh rasp. "Cora, no." She did not move. "Your brother died because he chose to ride with outlaws. Wyatt tried to save him. That is not a crime. That is love. If you want revenge, take it. But you will have to live with knowing you are no better than the men who killed him." Ben's hand shook, the gun wavering. Cora saw the war in his face, the grief and rage battling something softer, something broken. "You do not know what it was like," he said, his voice cracking. "Watching him die, knowing it was because Wyatt brought the law down on us." Cora took a slow breath. "I do not. But I know what it is like to lose someone. And I know revenge will not bring him back." Ben's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment Cora thought he would pull the trigger anyway, that grief would win over reason. Then Wyatt stepped around her, his hands up, his voice rough with emotion. "You are right," he said. "It is my fault. I set up the meeting. I thought I could fix it. I was wrong, and I have carried that guilt every day since. If you need to punish someone, punish me. But let her go. She has nothing to do with this. Ben stared at Wyatt, his face twisted with pain. Then he lowered the gun, his shoulders shaking. I cannot do this, he whispered. I cannot. The sheriff moved fast, disarming him, pulling him away. Ben did not resist. He just stood there, broken, and Cora felt a surge of pity so strong it hurt. Wyatt turned to her, his face pale, his hands shaking as they cupped her face. "Do not ever do that again," he said. "Do not ever step in front of a gun for me." Cora covered his hands with hers. "Why not? You have done it for me twice." Wyatt made a choked sound. "That is different." Cora shook her head. "No, it is not. We protect each other. That is what love is." Wyatt pulled her close, his arms tight around her, his face buried in her hair. "I thought I lost you," he said. "I thought he was going to kill you and I could not stop it." Cora held on, her own tears hot on her cheeks. But he did not. "We are alive, and we are together." Wyatt pulled back, his eyes red-rimmed, his expression fierce. "I love you," he said. "I do not care if it is too soon or too complicated or too anything. I love you, and I am not letting you go." Cora smiled through her tears. "Good, because I am not going anywhere." The town threw a wedding 2 weeks later, not because anyone approved, but because they could not resist the spectacle. Cora wore her mother's dress, altered to fit, simple and cream-colored with lace at the cuffs. Wyatt wore a new shirt, his hair trimmed, his face clean-shaven except for the short beard he refused to lose. They stood in the little church at the edge of town, the pews filled with curious onlookers and a handful of people who genuinely wished them well. The preacher, an old man with a voice like gravel, pronounced them husband and wife. And Wyatt kissed her in front of everyone. Slow and deliberate and full of promise. The crowd clapped, some enthusiastically, some grudgingly, and Cora did not care. She was married to a man who had risked everything for truth, who had stood beside her when the world tried to tear them apart, who loved her with a fierceness that made her believe in second chances. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, close enough to the newspaper office that Cora could walk to work, far enough from the freight yard that Wyatt could come home at night, without smelling like horses and dust. They fell into a rhythm, mornings spent over coffee, evenings spent planning the next edition, or repairing the freight company, his reputation. The town slowly, grudgingly, began to accept them. Havers and his partners were tried and sentenced. Ben was given a chance to start over in a neighboring territory, under the watchful eye of a marshal who believed in redemption. And Wyatt, for the first time in his life, stopped carrying the weight of his brother's choices. He still thought about him. He still mourned, but he no longer let that grief define him. Cora's newspaper thrived. She hired an assistant, a young woman with sharp eyes and a sharper pen, and together they turned the Gazette into the most respected paper in the territory. She wrote about the freight company as recovery, the town as growth, the small victories and hard-won progress that came from people choosing truth over comfort. And she wrote about love, the kind that was earned through fire and fear, and the decision to stand together when it would have been easier to walk away. Wyatt rebuilt the freight company, expanding the routes, hiring honest workers, proving to the territory that the Cutter name meant reliability and integrity. He still had enemies. He still faced whispers. But he also had Cora, and that made all the difference. One evening, 6 months after the wedding, Cora sat at the kitchen table, editing an article, while Wyatt stacked firewood by the hearth. The house smelled like bread and coffee, warm and lived in. Wyatt paused, looking at her across the room, and she felt the weight of his gaze. "What?" she asked, smiling. He shook his head, a small private smile tugging at his mouth. "Just thinking about how close I came to losing this. Losing you." Cora set down her pencil and walked over to him, sliding her arms around his waist. "But you did not," she said. "We made it." Wyatt pulled her close, his chin resting on the top of her head. "We did. And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." Cora looked up at him, her heart full. "I already know I would not. You are the best decision I ever made." The next spring brought new challenges. A drought threatened the cattle ranches. A rival newspaper tried to undercut the Gazette with sensational stories. Wyatt's freight company faced competition from a larger outfit out of Cheyenne. But they faced it together, Cora with her words, and Wyatt with his steady determination. They argued sometimes, fierce debates over strategy and risk that ended with laughter or kisses or both. They learned each other as rhythms. The way Wyatt needed silence after a hard day. The way Cora needed to talk through her thoughts before she could rest. They built a life that was not perfect, but was theirs. Earned through honesty and trust, and the kind of love that did not flinch from hard truths. By the time the first snow fell again, Cora was expecting their first child. She told Wyatt on a cold December morning, standing in the kitchen with a cup of tea in her hands and her heart in her throat. He stared at her, speechless, and then he swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with wonder. "We are going to have a baby." Cora cupped his face, her eyes bright with tears. "Yes, we are." Wyatt set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "I am going to be a father." Cora nodded. "A good one." Wyatt kissed her, slow and reverent, and Cora felt the fear and hope tangled together in his touch. He was thinking about his brother, about the family he had lost, and about the family he was building now, the chance to do it right. The baby arrived in late summer, a daughter with Wyatt's gray eyes and Cora's auburn hair. They named her Grace, for the second chance they had both been given. Wyatt held her with the kind of careful reverence that made Cora's heart ache. His rough hands impossibly gentle, his face transformed with love. "She is perfect," he whispered. Cora reached up, brushing tears from his cheek. "She is ours." Wyatt looked at her, his eyes bright. "I never thought I would have this. A family, a home, a life worth living." Cora smiled. "You always deserved it. You just needed someone to see it." Wyatt leaned down, kissing her forehead, then Grace's tiny hand. "Thank you," he said, "for everything, for believing in me when no one else did, for standing with me, for loving me." Cora held his gaze. Always. They raised Grace in the little house on the edge of town, teaching her to read with newspaper clippings, and teaching her to ride on Wyatt, his gentlest mare. They expanded the house, adding a second bedroom and a porch where they could sit on summer evenings and watched the sun set over the prairie. Cora continued to run the Gazette, her editorials shaping the conversation in Blue Crossing and beyond. Wyatt built the freight company into a model of integrity, his name no longer a whisper of scandal, but a mark of trust. And together, they proved that love was not about where you came from or what mistakes haunted you. It was about the choice you made every day to stand beside someone and build something better. Years passed. Grace grew into a bright, curious girl who loved words as much as her mother and horses as much as her father. She asked questions Cora could not always answer, questions about justice and fairness and why people made the choices they did. Cora and Wyatt answered as best they could, teaching her that truth mattered, that integrity mattered, that love was the hardest and most important work anyone could do. They told her about Wyatt, his brother, about the mistakes and the grief, about the way one bad choice could echo through a life. And they told her about second chances, about the way people could change if they were willing to face the truth and do the work. Grace listened, her gray eyes serious, and Cora thought that maybe, just maybe, they were raising someone who would make the world a little better. One evening, when Grace was 10, she came home from school with a bruised knuckle and a fierce expression. A boy had called her father an outlaw. Grace had punched him. Cora sat her down at the kitchen table, her heart torn between pride and exasperation. "You cannot solve every problem with your fists," she said. Grace lifted her chin, so much like Wyatt it hurt. He was lying. Papa is not an outlaw. Cora took her daughter's hand, her voice gentle. "No, he is not. But fighting will not change what people think. Words will. Truth will. Standing up for what is right, even when it is hard, that is what changes minds." Grace looked down, her jaw tight. "Then, I will write it. I will write the truth." Cora smiled, her eyes stinging. "That is my girl." Wyatt, standing in the doorway, met Cora's eyes over their daughter's head, and she saw the pride and pain and fierce love that mirrored her own. The last time Ben came to Blue Crossing was 3 years later. He arrived on a dusty afternoon, older and quieter, his face lined with hard years. He found Wyatt at the freight yard, unloading crates, and stood watching until Wyatt noticed him. They stared at each other, the weight of history thick between them. Finally, Wyatt set down the crate and walked over. "Ben," he said. Ben nodded. "Wyatt, I came to say I am sorry for what I did, for blaming you, for nearly killing your wife." Wyatt, his jaw tightened. "You nearly killed yourself." Ben looked away. "I know. I have been trying to figure out how to live with what I lost, what we both lost. I think I finally understand. My brother made his choices. You tried to save him, and I need to let him go." Wyatt was silent for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. Ben took it, and they stood there, two men bound by grief and blood, and the slow, painful work of forgiveness. Cora watched from the newspaper office window, her heart aching for both of them. She had written about forgiveness before, about the way it did not erase the past, but made it possible to move forward. She had never understood it as deeply as she did in that moment, watching Wyatt shake hands with the man who had nearly destroyed them both. Later, when Ben had ridden out of town and Wyatt came home, she met him at the door. "You did a good thing," she said. Wyatt pulled her close, his arms tight around her. "I did the only thing I could." He was family once. Maybe he can be again. Cora rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Maybe. And maybe that is enough. They stood there, wrapped around each other, and Cora thought about all the hard choices that had brought them here. All the moments when it would have been easier to walk away. And she thought about how grateful she was that they had chosen to stay. The years that followed were not perfect. There were droughts and harsh winters, business setbacks and personal losses. But Cora and Wyatt faced them together, their love deepening with every challenge overcome. They taught Grace to value truth over comfort, integrity over popularity, and love over fear. They watched her grow into a young woman who wrote with her mother as passion and worked with her father as steadiness. And they grew old together, their hands rougher, their faces lined. But their connection as strong as the day Cora had stepped between Wyatt and a gun and chosen love over safety. On quiet evenings, they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the prairie. And Cora would lean into Wyatt's side and think about that first cold morning when he had unloaded crates and she had written editorials, and neither of them had known that their lives were about to collide and transform. "You ever regret it?" Wyatt asked once. "Marrying me?" Cora looked up at him, her eyes bright. Not for 1 second. Wyatt smiled, that rare private smile that was hers alone. "Good, because I sure as hell do not." They sat together as the light faded. Two people who had chosen each other when the world said they should not, and built a life that proved love was worth fighting for.